I'm going to probably edit it so we're starting now, actually. Josh Karp, author and producer, that we were discussing character actors because I'm getting a bunch on my podcast, and one is Jeffrey Wright, and you mentioned the words, literally you said, whatever he's in, he's the best thing in it. And,
absolutely.
And that is the name of a documentary. The best,
really?
I think it's either called He's the Best Thing in It or just The Best Thing in It. I can't remember. But it's a documentary about character actors. It's not a very especially slick documentary, but it was entertaining because they interview all of these recognizable guys, like the classic, I know that guy, but I just can't remember his name. Those faces that are in dozens of movies as supporting characters. And while Jeffrey Wright is more than a supporting character, typically, it's funny you use the same phrase. He's the best thing in it. Check it out. It is a film. It might be on Netflix. I don't remember where I saw it.
Oh, totally. In fact, what's his name? Peter Jason. I don't know. You'd recognize him if you Googled him in a second. He's actually in The Other Side of the Wind, and he's absolutely one of those people. He's the guy who you're like, oh, I love it when that guy.
Yeah.
Is in that,
yeah.
But you would never know his name in a million years unless you just see him,
sure.
See him out.
And I'm pretty good with, over the years, obviously, given how many films I watch and, and the way I approach them, I do know a lot of these guys' names, but, there are just so many of them that I have no idea. I did not know that name, but I'm sure, again, you're right, I would know the face.
He is the, as I explained to my wife, I was like, he's the racist bartender in 48 Hours. Or whatever that was. He's the guy who Eddie Murphy gets in the argument with, and throws the shot glass through the window or whatever.
Yep.
But Peter's in everything, and he's fantastic.
When I saw 48 Hours in the movie theater as a kid with my friend, my camp friend, we went to Times Square. This is in the grittier days of Times Square. And we were in the theater watching 48 Hours, which is all about, cops and chasing thugs and all, and through New York City, right? It takes place in New York City, right?
No, it's San Francisco.
Oh, it's in San Francisco, so, oh well. But anyhow, when we came out of the theater, literally, cops were chasing, plainclothes cops were chasing after somebody, running down Broadway with their guns up, like that happened,
Right, so you're getting a live reenactment.
Exactly, it was fun. Right. You brought up The Other Side of the Wind.
Yeah.
So it's a good place to pop into that conversation. So I was calling you because we should have talked a while ago, but I imagine you were probably a little busier leading up to the premieres, I don't know, of both The Other Side of the Wind, but also The Love Me When I'm Dead, which is the making of documentary directed by Morgan Neville. Yeah. Which are now both available right this minute on Netflix.
Yes, as of Friday.
Yeah. So I got to see, just so you know, The Other Side of the Wind finally at the New York Film Festival in Alice Tully Hall. That was exciting.
I was there for both. Did you see the documentary too?
No, I tried to go. I didn't work fast enough to get on the list. There are several ways of my being able to get in if I had acted a little sooner.
Right.
But I got into the second screening, the second public screening. I wanted to get into the first one for obvious reasons. It worked out fine. I mean, if everything had worked out and I had acted a little earlier, I would have been able to see both of those films back to back, as you know. And with everybody there, I'm sure it would have been a lot more exciting. But what can you do?
Right.
It worked out pretty well. I got Peter Bogdanovich on the show after all.
Oh, cool. That's great.
Yeah, and then I get Josh Karp back, so that's nice, too.
No, not quite Peter Bogdanovich, but...
Well, listen, I'm happy about it. So I had to watch They'll Love Me When I'm Dead, like everybody else, on Netflix.
Okay.
But I really enjoyed it. And you are a producer on it.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
It was a great, unbelievable experience. It was really fun, kind of being able to go through the story again and then see it, kind of as through Morgan's eyes. Have somebody else who, is incredibly talented take, kind of the bones of something that I had worked on.
Right.
And, then see it on the screen and see it through the way he did it, which I thought was unbelievable.
And the bones you're talking about is your book, which we've talked about a couple of times on the show, but it's called Orson Welles' last movie, the making of The Other Side of the Wind. So the documentary rather, is largely using your book as
just as source material. But we went and redid, all the interviews, and and then Morgan used an unbelievable amount of archival footage from both the actual film The Other Side of the Wind, including stuff that never makes it into the film, and then from Orson's life and career, particularly, the last 15 years, 70 to 85.
Right. So, because what happened was, you and I talked the first time in 2015, if you can believe it.
Yeah, right.
And I think that things were still kind of up in the air as far as the final funds for The Other Side of the Wind. Wasn't sure. It was still in limbo. And then, in a kind of serendipitous turn of events, Netflix swooped in and ended up dropping all the necessary funds. So, able to kind of get the film out of its legal and its financial slump. Right?
Yeah.
And then with that happened, I think we got back on the phone, you and I, briefly, to talk about that.
Right. Yeah.
That was probably, 2017. So they then could provide all that footage not used in the final edit, right, for the documentary as well. So there was extra footage there that you were able to access.
Yeah, there were. I mean, I can't remember how many hours of footage, but whatever it was, he shot way more, considerably more than the average ratio, a filmmaker shoots. When you shoot a movie for 6 years, you tend to get a lot of extra footage, which was great for us. So we had footage of both Rich Little and Peter Bogdanovich playing the same part.
Explain that. Explain what this little bit of the background about that is.
Yeah, I think I've always found this to be the most telling thing about the film is that, Welles was making this film that was about a director coming back from exile in Europe who is trying to make an innovative comeback movie that he's having trouble getting funds for, which exactly what Welles himself is doing, right? And it's an aging director who winds up being played by John Huston. And so Welles, the film was he denied that it was autobiographical, but of course it was highly autobiographical. And one of the things he did was the film kind of evolved in real time. He was rewriting the script in this kind of art imitating life manner, based on events in his actual life. And so what happened was in 1970 when he starts, he has Joe McBride and Bogdanovich, who at the time are both writers. Bogdanovich in particular is just, he's not really a big director yet, playing guys who are writing biography of character. He hires John Huston in sometime about 1974 to play the lead, and hires Rich Little, of all people, the famous comedic impressionist, to play a character who is a young director who has made 3 incredibly successful movies in a row, who is a protege of the main character. And this is absolutely who Bogdanovich was at the time. And when Rich Little...
I think, by the way, Orson had guest appeared on the Copycats show, which was how he met Rich Little. And probably just because Orson Welles happens to be Orson Welles, he thought, I'm going to cast this guy in an unlikely... Like, back then, that wasn't done as nearly as frequently. Nowadays, it's very de rigueur, inspired casting choices.
Right.
But back then... Back then, it would not have been usual to have some impersonator or impressionist to play a lead actor in a movie.
Right. Well, and Bogdanovich was famous for going on the Tonight Show and doing celebrity impressions. So
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So this was kind of a direct, parody of Bogdanovich.
Oh, right. He did do that. That's right.
Yeah. He did a great Jerry Lewis, but he did Cary Grant. He did all kinds of stuff. And so when Rich Little winds up kind of leaving the film under mysterious circumstances, and they have to junk all this footage with him in this role, Welles talks to Bogdanovich, and Bogdanovich says, "Hey, why don't I take over the part?" And Welles says, "Well, what about the stuff you shot before?" And he goes, "Oh, just cut that out. You can reshoot that. That's not much." And so Bogdanovich literally goes from playing who he is in 1970 to playing who he is in 1974. He is the guy who's made Last Picture Show, Paper Moon,
right,
and What's Up, Doc?
Right.
So, and this is all kind of never spoken to. And he's, in a lot of ways, really playing out his relationship with Welles under both circumstances. So I always think that, to me, if you had to summarize the story of the movie, it's that Bogdanovich goes from playing exactly who he is in relation to Welles in 70, and then becomes a new character in 74 who is now who he is,
right,
playing out a relationship with
Wells. That's right. If that weren't enough, I'm actually reading those interviews. Finally, I'm kind of catching up to the interviews, Bogdanovich's interviews with Orson.
Yeah,
I'm finally reading that, so I'm getting a lot of the details about. Right now, I'm at that point now where they're talking about the other side of the wind.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, they had a relation, an unbelievably, cinematic relationship. I mean, it's like their story is like a Greek tragedy or a Shakespearean story or something.
Yeah, so a little bit of Chimes of Midnight come in there too, because with Falstaffian kind of a moment there where kind of really digs the dagger into Bogdanovich. I don't know. Do you think there you show the clip on the Tonight Show where Burt Reynolds, who's cast in several, at least two anyway, Bogdanovich films, is guest hosting for Johnny Carson, and Orson Welles is a guest, and they really speak rather maliciously about. They humiliate Bogdanovich, who's not there, mind you. But
at a time when Welles either is still living in Bogdanovich's house, or has recently
he's like
moved
permaguest.
Yeah, no, he was like the man who came to dinner. I mean, he moved in there in 75 and lived there, for a couple weeks.
Why?
And he, Welles,
was he homeless?
He made a lot of money, but he
spent
never
more of it.
Had any.
No, right?
I mean, he made a staggering amount of money he worked, and but he just couldn't. And it wasn't like he was spending it on anything.
Well, he did say how he cut down on his cigars at one point to raise money for the other side of the wind, which I think was really funny. That's funny.
Well, the guy he had handmade, custom made for him cigars,
hand rolled.
Cuba.
Yeah, right. No, I
so
figured
they were
that.
About $20 a piece, and he was putting away about 25 of them a day. So that was you're smoking like $500 of cigars a day.
It's cheaper to have a heroin habit.
It is.
That's funny. By the way, because of Bogdanovich was at the height of his directorial success, he had a rather large house with Orson Welles had his own wing, I believe. But he was like the man who came to dinner. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, and it was. I mean, that also, it's kind of would be a great sitcom, is Orson, Sybil Shepherd, and Peter living in this house with Orson kind of taking over the whole place and getting freaked out because they're out of fudgesicles. I always loved that he used to accuse them of eating all the fudgesicles.
Orson Welles was a deeply oral fixated guy.
For sure.
I mean, obviously his appetite, but
the cigars.
Yeah.
And the fudgesicles, yeah.
Sometimes a fudgesicle is just a fudgesicle. That's what I'm going to say.
And sometimes a fudgesicle is just a cigar.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Anyway, so where were we? Keep getting.
So we were talking about Orson and Peter's relationship.
Yeah. Orson, right. So the Tonight Show. Can you want to finish the Tonight Show anecdote where they kind of turn the screws on him a little bit?
Yeah, and and it's funny because I mean, as both in working on the book and on the film, Peter, really, they had this bizarre relationship, but I really always kind of, as time went on, just struck home for me how much Peter really gave to Orson. At a time when Peter is on top of the world, and Orson kind of, Orson was very. I mean, people were happy to let Orson kind of invade their lives because he was Orson.
Oh,
and
he's so much fun, and he was Orson.
Great to be around. He was magnetic. He was charming, but Peter really gave and gave and gave to Orson, and I don't think I understood that when I went into the project. I always kind of viewed it a little bit the other way around before I really understood. And I think Peter really, in an almost heroic way, gave to Orson and had patience for him. And I mean, he shot in Peter's house while he was living there for, quite a while.
The Other Side of the Wind, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. The Love Me When I'm Dead, which stands on its own, I have to say, is an entertaining documentary about Hollywood, about Orson Welles, about Peter Bogdanovich, who has participated, contemporarily speaking, in this documentary, which is, yes, a making of the Other Side of the Wind documentary, but again, it does stand up on its own as an entertaining documentary. There's just so much I had learned that I did not know. I'm botching this up, but Bogdanovich's house was next door to...
Oh, no, so you're thinking of the house in Arizona.
Oh, is it Arizona and I'm screwing it up?
House, yeah, so he was kind of in residence at Peter's house in Bel Air for quite a while. But before that, in 1974, they shot in Carefree, Arizona. And there's a film within the film.
Right.
That this filmmaker is making. And it's kind of makes fun of atmospheric European cinema.
That's right. Okay.
Of the day.
That's Antonioni, right?
Located literally next door to the house that Antonioni blew up in Zabriskie Point.
That's right. That's what that was in Arizona. I see. I got that mixed up. Okay. Very good. Yeah. So I just want for those listening to understand. So on that Johnny Carson episode, they just kind of made fun of the success or lack of I guess one of the films that was after what's Nickelodeon was kind of a flop and starred Burt Reynolds. But Burt Reynolds, you come to know that he's such a huge star. One little flop isn't going to really be a big deal to him.
Right.
But it had to hurt Peter Bogdanovich's feelings. So Peter Bogdanovich is watching this from home, this Tonight Show episode, and, writes Orson, lets him know that I guess I know how you feel about me, because they were really making fun of of him and of this failure of the film, and Orson sends 2 letters, right? It's just another level of cruelty.
Yeah, he sends him 2 letters, and one is this heart, pouring out his heart, apologizing to Peter, and saying how horrified at how cruel he's been to him on television, and that he will never forgive himself for being so cruel to somebody who's been such a good friend and so supportive. And then the other letter says, "You deserved it," and Orson tells him to take his pick, which is just an unbelievable story of it's very cruel. If you depersonalize it, I guess you wind up writing it off to the kind of what somebody who lives that kind of life begins to view the world like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense, but when you're somebody whose personality is so outsized, I guess, you feel entitled to do those kind of things. But I think it hurt Peter extremely.
Yeah. It took a while for them to
reconcile,
and even then I don't think it was ever quite healed
up. But he was really a true believer in Orson.
Yeah.
And then, had this, had a career downturn that in many ways, I think, didn't directly mirror Orson's, but he went through a lot of the same problems Orson did, which,
Well, maybe, yeah, he it's interesting. I mean, my thought about that is, if it's worth anything, is that Peter was stuck in an age that was sort of outdated. His aesthetic, his inspiration, and Hollywood is different. I think Peter would have thrived making all those films that he wanted to make years earlier, but it just wasn't in step anymore on some level.
Right.
But he had this one story he wanted to keep telling about this frozen moment in time, but there's no denying he's brilliant. I think, is it too simple to say that Orson was fine as long as the power dynamic was in his favor? It had to be humiliating to be leaning on Peter. So he maybe felt just ambivalent about that, and passive-aggressively let Peter know that
sure.
He wasn't happy with that dynamic.
Yeah,
it was great as long as he was in the charge of that dynamic.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's probably a difficult change for anybody to experience.
Sure, it is.
But when you're Orson Welles, and you've had somebody who's been just worshipful of you and who's done all this stuff for you, to have this dynamic change and really be surpassed, at least in commercial success.
Mm-hmm.
Orson always had Citizen Kane, which he claimed was his curse, but was also the ace in the back pocket where everybody always, could say, well, the guy did make the greatest movie ever made.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think he could not deal with that shift in the power dynamic. And it was interesting because then, he had all these power, relationships where he and John Huston were equals.
Mm-hmm.
Under this scenario, and they're together. And then Gary Graver, his cinematographer, is kind of in this position where he's like an indentured servant to Orson, who comes whenever called, who gives up his whole life happily.
Right.
Orson.
Your book, which again was called Orson Welles' Last Movie, and this documentary really pay, I think, an appropriate due to Gary Graver. You give him his due. It's great to see it. If there's ever any question or that about Gary's place in the story and what he sacrificed, you've given him, I think, finally a fair amount of attention in that way. That he deserved.
It's really, it's almost inconceivable to think of another relationship
right
like that in Hollywood. Somebody who. I don't know what Gary would have become had he not worked for Orson, but he gave everything to this movie and to Orson, and would have done it again.
Yeah, and he was really, really distraught when Orson Welles died.
Yeah, that's one of the saddest things in the film, I thought, is listening to him talk about how... Actually, listening to Peter Jason, the actor we were talking about, he tells the story of how Gary said to him, I don't know what to do. Every day I wake up and I call Orson, or Orson calls me, and he tells me what to do that day. And now I don't know what to do because Orson is gone. And that's just such a heartbreaking, story. Amazing.
Well, in an awkward shift, you have pinned yourself. You've kind of tied yourself to this story for at least, I'm going to guess 5 years, maybe longer.
Longer, yeah.
Yeah, 6-7 years at least. The story's over. This chapter. Maybe the book on this is shut because it's on Netflix. Hopefully, millions of people will see the movie. Make of it what I tell people. Go see it with a very open mind and don't expect anything. Just take it in. Take it in and. Appreciate it for what it is. It's it's visually a feast. There's no denying it, and it is a fun thing to watch. But it is also like Orson Welles' Appetite, right there in front of you.
Yeah. It's funny. I earlier this fall I wrote an article about Dennis Hopper's film The Last Movie for Esquire, right?
Yeah.
And which was his kind of mini version of The Other Side of the Wind, kind of his epic, never-ending,
right? Overly ambitious, right?
Make a perfect film,
right?
And make a piece of art. And one of the things that happened when the film was coming out, there were all these interviews where Hopper said stuff like, I know this is a lot to ask, but I think people will really understand it if they watch it 3 or 4 times. And you don't need to watch Other Side of the Wind 3 or 4 times, but what is interesting is I think judging by people, friends of mine, and like my brother-in-law is a really good example.
Mm-hmm.
They really found it fascinating, and then saw it again and found new stuff. And I think that's what's cool about Welles is that Welles really, every movie he makes can be about everything. Do you know? And I don't mean that in a diffuse way. People take so many different things away from his work and different things away from it at different times and at different viewings.
Sure.
And the idea, that he, like his daughter Beatrice said, every frame for him was like a canvas and an individual work of art.
Sure.
And so, that's one of the things that's really fascinating about watching the film.
So I guess what I was going to start to say before was, what are you going to do now? You wrote this article about the last movie, but are you ready to, move on yourself? That's it was such a big story for so many years.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I mean, I'm working on a book proposal for about a non-film subject, and I have a TV pilot that I wrote that got optioned and that's being shopped. But what's funny is I keep thinking, God, I wish there were another movie like this to write about, and in a way, it hopefully that will emerge again someday. But
yeah,
really, this story, as far as the making of a movie and writing about big characters in Hollywood, there is a little bit of kind of like, that's wow, okay, finally,
yeah.
I'm not writing about John Huston and Orson Welles anymore, which was such a great opportunity.
Yeah.
You just because the world doesn't make those guys anymore.
Right.
So there's, so I'm doing a bunch of other stuff and have other projects moving forwards, but there's, a little bit of, loss, I think, in this all coming to a happy conclusion.
Yeah.
In that, it's like, writing about these epic figures, and this crazy once in a lifetime story.
Right. Well, again, the documentary is called "Love Me When I'm Dead," which is a quote that, again, getting back to Orson and Peter's relationship, but Orson, understood how people's inclination is to mythologize and to repaint memory. When someone passes away, all of a sudden we start to create a new memory of who they were. And I think Orson understood that for all the complexities of how people felt about him, that and his work, right?
Right.
That after he dies, they were going to embrace him.
And he was right.
Yeah.
And it's only, grown. I mean, it's as far as a filmmaker, nobody sits there and goes, oh, what about those movies he didn't do this to, or what about, Don Quixote, or what about that? The average person who knows him as a filmmaker thinks, oh my God, that's the guy who made Citizen Kane.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm grateful for the fact that I got to read your book, and get caught up myself in and get caught up in the whole story, and get to know you and talk to you a few times, and I'm glad to have had you on the podcast. And it's a place, I'd be proud to have you back on any time for future projects.
I'm happy to come back anytime.
And you can talk about if your new book does get indeed optioned and published, please do come back on, even if it's not a film subject. Doesn't matter. You can talk about anything you want.
You got it. Thanks, Adam.
All right. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Take care.
All right. Talk to you soon.
All right, bye.